Hi, this is Paul. Algo regularly sends me new channels because subscriptions really don't matter much in terms of what Algo thinks I want to see, and Algo is often right. And one of the channels that it often serves me up is Dad Saves America. And just because it has Saves America, I'm sort of not necessarily excited to watch it because, well, you know me. But this, I actually saw a clip of this, and I watched the clip, and that, of course, brought me to the whole video. And let's start it here.
Been a long time together, and I know we're heading towards your time being up. Um, when I
You don't think
think
we're
of,
gonna die?
No. Now, watch this moment again. This is just fun. This is just for fun. Watch this moment again and watch Bret's eyes, because it's like your time being up, and Bret's sitting there, and he's just got his calm face, and it's like, what did he just say? Just watch his eyes. It's hysterical. It's a joke.
I do.
your time being up, a long time together, and I know we're heading towards your time being up. Um, when I
You don't
think
think we're gonna die, do you?
Actually, in all seriousness, probably not at this moment, but biologists do know we expire. We live in the age of decay.
when I think about your worry that started us off, and my worry too, I think all three of us, that we are on the precipice of something.
Now, before we get to the worry, I mean, this is what happens every time I make a video. You know, the complainers about me interrupting, they have a point. I interrupt myself. That's what it's like to live in my ADHD addled brain. So, of course, it's impossible to catch up with my channel. And anybody who's been around long enough knows that, which is a liability, not an asset. But I watched the Justin Wells, Paul Anleitner video, and that sent me to this video. And I watched this video on the plane when I was heading up to Olympia. And what Sean Coyne said here really grabbed me.
Okay, so I had this idea that that our stories, we make them come true.
Oh,
So if you think about sort of you're in my generation. So when I was a kid, you'd watch Star Trek, right?
of course. Yeah.
And then you look at all of the technology that emerged post Star Trek, and it all looks like the Star Trek technology.
Yes. Yes.
So the
yes.
cell phone, and what's bothering me today is, so we generate the fantasies of our stories as a collective cultural grammar.
Yes.
And so if you take the pulse of a culture, I suggest it's a good idea to look at the most popular stories that are being told, and people are
Excellent.
parting with their dollars to see
Yeah.
them.
Excellent. Excellent.
And so the tenor of the last 10 to 15 years of the most popular entertainment is very dystopian.
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
extraordinarily superhero driven. We and it's always this apocalyptic
Yep.
context.
Yep. Yep.
And so one of the things that we do at StoryGrid, the thing, right? So you got to have a kind of a global goal state. And our goal state is to change those stories from being, we're about to fall off the cliff, to, wow, we've got an opportunity here to create a new complexity of the world.
Yes.
So,
yes.
so the chaotic.
Okay, so last week before the Northwest Estuary, and the week before that, I did a bunch of apocalyptic videos. So if you want to know where I stand with respect to apocalyptic videos, and I know perfectly well that a bunch of you will say, no, this is exactly the problem. They're distracting us from the poly crisis or the meta crisis, or everything is not okay, so now is the time to panic. But my question for you is, okay, well, what does your panic look like or take? So I thought of that when, nearly every, and then I also had the game B, sort of Jordan Hall's track versus, I used Eric because Eric had just put out a video with Chris, but Bret Brett and Eric do not see eye to eye on everything. That's very clear, but they're both sort of on the game B apocalyptic track. We've got to save the world, but then this isn't new for Brett, but I think in fact, there's very little new right here for Bret in terms of, I don't know that he said anything different here than he usually does, but he said it very clearly. So I thought it was worth listening to. And then whoever the guy is doing Dad Saves America, whoever Dad is, boy, this is very TLC. This is very much like everything in this space and in this corner and in all of the people that were in Olympia, Washington. Bret and Heather were not there, but all the people that were in Olympia, Washington, working out their stuff in the face-to-face encounter, Northwestuary, whatever you want to call it. And those videos are coming out. So
I increasingly find myself focused on something that you mentioned a little bit offhandedly, which is that our culture invented these things called religions. And those of us that believe in them, I'm Catholic, and I'm getting, frankly, more Catholic with every day that passes by, that this is something that dispensing with it turns out to perhaps be a fatal blow to the other pieces of the puzzle that we take for granted as enabling all of this stuff. And I'm like rediscovering like Burkean conservatism in my 40s in a certain sense. And I'm just curious because I hear a little bit of that in what you've already said and here and elsewhere. But how do you think about that? How do you think about the role of religions, especially the big ones, the old ones, that all say pretty similar stuff in this moment? And can we save Western civilization or just civilization writ large without that piece of the puzzle?
This is going to be a stretch for your viewers, but give me a little leash here.
Please.
The re-embrace of religion makes a tremendous amount of sense. We are so far off track, and it's so obvious. And atheism has something to do with that. I don't think atheism is the cause, but it took the safety off the gun. And civilization has now run away into this hyper-novelty spiral that it's literally destroying us. You can see the individuals are not well. The civilization is not well. This is going to end badly. It is absolutely natural, and I would imagine that if we had the ability to look back into history with sufficient resolution, we would see that there is a retreat into orthodoxy at the point that you find that your civilization has gone nuts. And I think even in what little I understand of the sacred texts, this is discussed, right? That, Sodom and Gomorrah are something, and the idea is there's something to retreat to when a civilization has lost its mind. So it's not surprising that we would see this re-embrace of these ancient traditions. Here's the part that's going to be a stretch. We can't do it, and we must do it, right? We have to get out of this spiral.
And actually, the way he said that, I think is exactly perfect. We can't do it, and we must do it. The only difficulty that Bret has is there's only we who can and must do it, and can't and must do it. And of course, religious people say, we're not alone.
We absolutely have to. It may well be that the best tools we have are ancient wisdom patterns that our ancestors knew, but we can't return to them because we don't live in their world. And that's the problem. So really, I think the question is, can we embrace the need to retreat from our hurtling into chaos? And can the religions figure out how to, I wish I had a better word than modernize, but can the religions bring themselves up to date for a world that their authors didn't know anything about either?
and this is a point that I've made. I should probably, I don't go out, and for the most part, I did it with Tom Holland, I did it with Mary Harrington, but Tom Holland was a super special case, and of course, I've never done it with Jordan. I did it that one time with Jordan Peterson, and I'll talk to Jordan again. But this is maybe, I think, some time about, okay, if I'm going to do an event here at Living Stones, who do I want to invite? Of course, the question is, who can I afford to invite? But who do I want to invite? And Bret's actually pretty high on that list, because I do find Bret, well, actually, I'd like Bret and Heather together, because I think they're a wonderful team. And I think the modeling that they're doing about their relationship and their marriage is something that's desperately needed on the internet. And when I saw them at the art conference, I told them that. I had 1 minute to tell them something, and that's what because I often have in the top of my head, if I have 1 minute to tell someone something, what do I want to say? And I choose that very carefully, and so that's what I said it to them. It goes up to the top of their hierarchy. Yeah. Religion, Christianity, Protestantism, Catholicism, to the degree. Catholicism... get myself in trouble. Catholicism is sort of like Caesar Augustus. Now, that shouldn't be controversial given the fact that Caesar Augustus was pontifex, and the Roman Catholic Church has continued to have a pontifex ever since. What do I mean that Roman Catholic Church is sort of like Caesar Augustus? Caesar Augustus, in the words of Tom Holland, was probably the world's greatest politician. Why? Because he became the emperor, and it was a degree of kayfabe that everybody in the empire said, no, we don't have an emperor. We're a republic. He's just the first citizen. Oh. But it was complete kayfabe because everybody knew he wasn't the first citizen, but everybody said he was the first citizen, and Caesar Augustus managed to keep that going. Now, successive emperors in the Claudian Julian line couldn't maintain that the way Augustus could, until, of course, Nero, and it's a whole different show with Nero. But Christianity has been working on this for a very long time. Protestants are just sort of, I just said that about the Catholics. Protestants are just as bad, but they're just fractured all over the map, because there's a whole bunch of Protestants that are just like, we haven't changed a bit since the New Testament. It's like, wow. And other Protestants are just completely on the other side saying, yeah, we're changing all the time. In fact, we're ready to change everything right now. In fact, everything must change. In fact, they would look at Bret Weinstein and say, oh, you're way behind the curve. We have changed a ton. And, well, they have. But Protestants are sort of in that space where it's okay to have that conversation, whereas the Catholics sort of had it in Vatican II and are kind of paying a price for that now. But Bret is right. But, well, let's let him play a little bit more, then I want to go to a different video.
And that is not an easy trick to do, because when you look back at an ancient religious text, which we regard as the product of evolution, right? It is a compendium of wisdom that was built by an evolutionary force that pruned the wheat from the chaff. It is not up to date to modern circumstances. That said, there's nobody on earth who can look at those texts and say, here's the part that's still relevant as written. Here's the part that's relevant, but it's written in such a way that you'll derive the wrong lesson from it. And here's the part that has become toxic because the new circumstances are radically different from the old ones.
Now, I'd like to nuance that, but basically what he's saying is that, oh boy, this is so hard. And he's so right, because religions have to sort of continue on in terms of all the technological disruption that they live with while trying to maintain the thread. And he's exactly right that nobody can really, fish the poop out of the pool? It was just in yesterday's video, so you should remember it.
Be both of, I don't know. But Ham, something think the black line runs from Ham.
Right.
But both of them, again, use religion to be justifying what we would today call one of the worst things, racism.
Okay, well, don't look. Right.
Is it worth it to like resurrect that whole structure when it comes with that. It's what I call the one turd in the pool theory. Like, I mean, a book that contains, okay, we're okay with slavery, it's terrible on women, it's terrible on homosexuals. It's like if somebody said, yeah, but you know what, there's only one turd in the pool, jump on in. I wouldn't jump in if there was even one turd in the pool. And I wouldn't want to like resurrect a book and a mythology that...
Well, okay.
And of course, there's a little purity myth there, as if he's not swimming in anything, he thinks, and of course he is.
You get me?
Yeah. I mean, there's nothing incoherent about that argument. Although I think it still leaves you in an awkward position, because the postmodernist would say, take a look at your stance and say, well, you defend Western civilization, and there's plenty of turds floating in that pool. Well, but
Okay.
right.
All right, you win that one.
Well, it's rough because
there are plenty of turds
well, we
floating
look
in
back
that
at
pool.
the past,
That's true.
right? And
but we can. Well, but here's the thing: we can fish our turds out. Like we had slavery, but we fished that turd out of the pool. You can't do that. The Bible.
Now, Bret is right, Bill is wrong. It's just that simple.
Wisdom that was built by an evolutionary force that pruned the wheat from the chaff, that is not up to date to modern circumstances. That said, there's nobody on earth who can look at those texts and say, here's the part that's still relevant as written. Here's the part that's relevant, but it's written in such a way that you'll derive the wrong lesson from it. And here's the part that has become toxic because the new circumstances are radically different from the old ones. There's nobody on earth who can do that job. It's Chesterton's fence all the way down. And so when you're faced with that puzzle, we have to agree on some fundamentals. We have to agree on what the objective of the exercise is, right? I would argue the most fundamental objective, we don't go extinct. Second most fundamental.
Is that really the most fundamental objective? Because in some ways, he is pushing on Peterson's meaning question, and even Vervaeke's question about what do you care about even after you die? Simple survival is not all we care about. In fact, it doesn't work that way for us. In fact, I'm thinking about my sermon this week my sermon this week is on Exodus 11, 12, and 13 on the Passover, where it's very interesting. You have, okay, they're liberating Israel from Egypt, and then the passages are just going, and they've got the plagues going, and then the Lord says, for the 11th plague or the 9th plague, he's not going to bow. So let me tell you what's going to happen in the 10th plague, and that one's going to do the trick. Then, of course, he goes to Pharaoh. Pharaoh says, I'm never going to say, get out of here. I don't want to see you anymore. And Moses says, that's right. You will never see me again. But then the text pauses. In chapters 12 and 13, you have all of this discussion about the ceremony and the ritual and keep this alive and teach this to your children. And then, of course, commentators on the text for a long time as well. This is all the story part is to sort of justify this ritual, and the ritual is sort of Chesterton's fence. And the story part is a just-so story to justify the ritual. But that never actually answers the question of where did the ritual come from and why is the ritual there? I mean, there's a lot of modernist biblical scholarship that has tended to do that. So, now let's let him talk a little bit more.
We liberate people meaningfully as much as possible. Beyond that, there are a lot of questions.
Again, the liberation thing, it's like, is that really, is liberation, and when he says that, this is sort of continues to be, a vestige from the counterculture, that a Rousseauian framework where the main problem that human beings have is that they are bound by certain things. Well, maybe they're bound by custom and culture, or they're bound by religion, or maybe they're bound by biology, and so we're going to look for a transhumanist future where we're going to try to transcend our biology, et cetera, et cetera. Now, again, Bret's a very reasonable guy in many respects, and I like him and Heather a lot, but the basic point that I'm making is, sort of like I'd make with Sam Harris, which is that the ideals are not that self-evident. And this is where I think Peterson's contribution has been important, because Peterson has basically said, I'm going to go back into these old texts to see if I can work through and find my ideal. Now, you can critique Peterson's project in a lot of different ways, and there are hundreds, maybe even thousands of hours of video on the internet of me doing precisely that. But I think, generally speaking, Jordan has a better project and a better program than Bret and Heather are sort of leveraging, because Bret and Heather are, for the most part, telling you what the problem is. And I don't think they really have much answer for where to go from here. And my response to them has always been that what he's describing is actually a part of religion always. The religious process is always trying to, in fact, the entire quest of theology of God is about figuring out the world. And I can go back to Ezekiel Kaufman and revolutionary monotheism instead of evolutionary monotheism. I've got plenty of videos about that. Read or go find Christine Hayes and her Yale channel on Judaism. We could talk about God number one and God number two. We could talk about all of these things. But basically, in many ways, the God conversations are proxies for the conversations about the ultimate. And this Peterson has very much figured out and gets right. And really part of what Peterson is doing in the culture is pressing into this and leaning into this. Now, I got my morning ritual, my morning routine, and one of the things I usually do if I have time is I take the dog out on the levee and take the dog for a nice, vigorous 5K walk, and then I get on the levee, and that's a time that I'll often listen to something, and okay, do I listen to my audiobook on Glenn Lowry or any 4 or 5 other audiobooks I'm listening to? Do I listen to The Rest is History, or do I look for YouTube to see what's up? And bang, right at the top of the algorithm, Sam talking to Alistair McGrath, and it's like, I am all over this one. And yeah, because right from the start, one of Sam's big questions with respect to his conversation about Unitarianism versus Trinitarianism is always the question of accretions or progress or development. And Sam rightly understands. He didn't actually, I was sort of waiting for him to ask Alistair McGrath this question, because there is definitely tension within sort of the Reformed idea of sola scriptura, and also the idea that the Nicene formula of the Trinity is something that develops over time. Now, in a live stream recently, someone asked that question, and I gave you my answer for it. My answer probably isn't too far from Tim Mackey's answer, and I thought Alistair McGrath made the answer very clearly. And the book that I usually point to when I make this argument is Alistair McGrath's book on heresy. And I remember when I first made that comment, Sam was right on it and said, now, because you made that comment, I bought that book and I read that. I'm not sure McGrath is saying what you're saying. And I said, well, so then I had to pull my book off the shelf and read it and say, well, fair enough, but that's what I think. And so watch this whole conversation. It's only got 400 some views right now, but this is, at least for the corner, this video is a major deal. Sam has been going out and Sam has been doing the kind of work I hate to do. Because I know a ton of you would love me to have Eric on the channel, to have Bret on the channel, to have Jordan on the channel. A lot of you would like me to do the Chris Williamson thing. And I've met Chris Williamson. Chris Williamson and I are on good terms. I have nothing against Chris Williamson, but Chris Williamson's game is not my game. I have never been about trying to establish a big YouTube channel or having conversations with the big heavy hitters. You've got Chris Williamson, you've got Joe Rogan, you've got all kinds of other people that are trying to climb that ladder. And I'm not saying Sam is trying to do this, but I could totally understand why Sam would want to talk to Alistair. I just don't. I would rather talk to people with whom I am going to develop a long-term relationship than talk to high-status people who I'll have one and done or maybe 2 or 3 conversations with them, but for the most part, they're going to be way too busy with all kinds of very wonderful things, and they're not going to have time for a silly little pastor in Sacramento, California, and the group of meaning crisis misfits that he gathers. Yeah, I know some of you, I just hurt your little egos. I am the chief of you misfits. So if you're misfitted, I'm misfitted further. All right? So don't take offense at me calling you that. But all of us who gather and try to work out our stuff together, to me, that's what's really exciting. Having a conversation with a high status person is fun, but you know, you sort of have the enjoyment of it for a little bit before they come, and then you have the conversation with them, and then it's done. I would much rather develop longer-term relationships to the degree that my Dunbar number will allow it. So when I saw this conversation, whoosh, but now I've buried the lead, let's play it.
So I guess that leaves open a question of, and this is sort of on behalf of my friend, Pastor Paul Vanderklay, is early Christianity, is it a laboratory that is in some sense sort of Darwinian, where the groups or ideas that are able to, you know, attract the most followers and retain those ideas through generations are the ones that better succeed? And, you know, early Christianity had a lot of questions, say, around virginity. What was the proper place of virginity in the church? Should all Christians strive to retain, you know, virginity? Should it be kind of a select few, or should that just not be something that the Christian church emphasizes? And you could see how a Darwinian process could favor different answers on that particular question. I guess, do you think that it's fair to compare this laboratory as something like a Darwinian competition between groups and ideas and dogmas in early Christianity?
Well, it's certainly a competition. I mean, and I think that if we use the language of finding the best explanation, then in many ways we're talking about the emergence of a way of thinking which is seen as the best. And that, if you like, displays.
Now, pardon me for interrupting, because I know some of you have a real problem with that. Alistair McGrath's first degrees, PhDs, were in science. And Alistair McGrath had a really good conversation with Bret Weinstein, put together by Justin Brierley, back when Justin Brierley was doing Unbelievable. And Justin Brierley actually tried to set up, and after a conversation between myself and Bret Weinstein, but Bret's schedule couldn't do it, so it didn't happen. But just a little background information. Please keep going.
Places older ways of thinking. In Christianity, the oldest ways of thinking aren't necessarily the best. They're simply the ones that were first proposed as ways of making sense of Scripture, and then they're evaluated over time. So I think you're putting your finger on quite a good point here. There is certainly a process of selection as people, in effect, reflect on the options they have at their disposal and are trying to work out which seems to be the best, the most reliable, the most faithful. And certainly also that there were debates in early Christianity about virginity, martyrdom, a whole series of things like this. And what you find is that over a period of time, some views that were quite popular early on gradually begin to recede into the background as different ways of thinking begin to emerge or bubble up as having greater intellectual depth and practical application. So in effect, if you like, Christianity is on a learning curve as it's trying to discover what it really is and where its foundational documents and resources are taking it. And most scholars would say probably by the 4th century that those things have really been sorted out. But if you're a scholar, what you find is this extremely exciting period of the 2nd and 3rd centuries where people are, constantly saying, let's try this, and testing it out and checking how good it is. But as you say, some fall by the wayside because they turn out to be not so good. They're not being imposed on people. It's rather that the Christian church is gradually saying, well, we're not so sure about this, but this looks better, and trying to test this out.
Sure.
We'll come back to this because Sam follows up probably where your mind is going with this towards the end of his conversation with Alistair McGrath. Okay, back to this one.
About what structures are net positive, what structures are net negative, and there's no ancient tradition that's up to the challenge as written. If we can all see that, if we can understand that you can't go back, you can go some degree back, some places yes, some places no, we are going to go forward one way or the other. And we have a lot of control over whether we go forward into hell or we go forward through the adaptive valley into some...
Now, again, we have a lot of control it doesn't seem to me we have a lot of control. And this gets into the questions of powers and principalities and the question of what, rather than seeing sort of us in control down here, I think we're better off seeing much more verticality going on, because them getting bounced out of Evergreen, them trying to make their way in the exile of YouTube land, getting demonetized. There are powers and principalities at work. And I know that scares some of you. Jordan Peterson will just call them spirits. And of course, I've covered that here. But then the question is, well, how in fact do we live in a world where forces far larger than ourselves, and now secular people can say, yeah, politics and atmospheres and moods and fads and cultures and movements and ideologies, et cetera. All of those things are worrying. How, in fact, do we engage? And so it's not to be on YouTube, to be having these conversations is not uninvolved, but it's helpful if you sort of understand and are able to sort of see reality through a bigger lens. And again, I think this is a lot of what Jordan has been working on.
Better future that we can't really envision from here. If we understand that that's the puzzle, and we are careful about our embrace of tradition, recognizing that it's a natural moment for that to be arising, then there's a lot of hope. But if we're going to embrace the orthodoxy without recognizing that it's not a good fit for the 21st century, if we're going to abandon it and hurtle headlong, I don't see much of a future for humanity. I think both of those are fatal errors.
I actually have a question for you. In part because we have a number of friends who do not have faith, as we do not. And these number of friends increasingly say things like, I wish I believed. I wish I had a religion. And I don't quite...
She's going, it's like, we were just in Olympia, Washington, with an entire church full of people breaking down into estuary meetings, half of them saying exactly this. It's like, I watched this video and it's like, we don't need a TLC on-ramp. They're doing it for us.
I don't quite know what that means, but I've heard it from a number of people at this point. And I think that these
guys probably know Rafe Kelly. Wait till you see Rafe Kelly's talk. I mean, she's just described Rafe Kelly.
We live in a way as if there is a moral good, even though we do not believe in an external force that is imposing it. And I wonder, you said that you feel like you're becoming more Catholic every day. What does that mean to you? Like, how does that manifest? Or how are your beliefs or your actions, or is it one or the other, that are becoming more Catholic? I'm trying to wrestle with what people mean at this point when they say, I am religious, or I wish that I had faith.
So, I offhandedly will say I'm like the closest thing Christians can be to Jewish, which is I'm 100% Italian and raised Catholic and went to so like the being Catholic is like is woven into my genetic lineage in a certain sense. It's like the Pope is in Rome. We're actually sending our son to Italy for college, and to Rome. It'll be a short trip to the Vatican. So, to answer your question,
and that's going to be less secular than America?
It's a couple things. So first, very tangibly, we made a bunch of education choices for our son that were very active about all the things that you write about in your book. We put him in a Waldorf school when he was little and did no media until he was, pretty old, relatively speaking. And then we've moved him around multiple times. But one of the things that didn't
You only have one son?
happen is he didn't get confirmed. He got baptized when he was born, but he didn't go through any of the other religious parts of the Catholic sacraments. Catholicism's got a lot of doodads and a lot of rituals. And so I'm actually every Sunday going with him for several hours to this adult rite for him to get confirmed. It'll actually happen in April after Easter. So that's a tangible thing I'm doing. And what I'm finding is it's pretty amazing. It's amazing to be there with him. Even when it's boring, which often it is, it like every time it sparks an existential conversation between us as we drive away. And the way I think about it increasingly is on multiple levels, because I'm like as I think you could tell, I'm like a cerebral guy. But there's a couple things that are part of what attracts me back to this thing I inherited just by accident of birth and family. One is that I like that it hasn't changed very much. As I mentioned, like the lighthouse at night. Like, you don't know where humanity invented lighthouses because when you're in a ship and it's dark and you're in the water, you need something that's on solid ground so you know how far you are from there, even if you don't intend to land and dock. It's like, okay, that's where that is. I know that's always there. And that anchor I find powerful. I think the other piece of the puzzle for me is there is a logic that I think is in the old. It's in what God says to Moses in the Bible. Moses asks him, "Who are you? What should I call you?" And he says, "I am who I am," or "I am being. I am being." And that, even, I don't know if scientifically is the right word. It almost certainly is not. But the notion that there is a sort of there is a thing that is being, that is not nothing, but it is the meta of being, strikes me as being profoundly true. In the same way that the number 2 is almost an adjective. Or 2 books, 1, 2. But there is a number 2 that is an abstract thing that is both real and also not real. And what does that mean? That that there's this thing, number 2, and we can use, or any number for that matter, and we can use math, and it's like, and that it works. Like, it's completely crazy that math works. Like, math shouldn't work. What's that mean? And I know I'm like way off the reservation, and Bret, your brother, would probably have all kinds of stuff to say about this as a mathematician. But I look at all that and I say, you know what? I'm doubling down, man. I'm doubling down. I can see where we are.
What's so funny is that I don't know who this guy is. I don't know his background. I suspect, just given the beautiful home, he has 1 child. There's a really nice camera in the background, and I pay attention to cameras. I've always liked cameras, and about a couple of years after I got into this, I got a nicer camera, which you all are hopefully benefiting from at this point. But my impression is he's a high status guy. And what's funny is that it's like he's talking this. It's like, dude, you have no idea. You have no idea. You are so far from being alone in this thing. It's just that, all of us misfits here in the TLC, we're low status people. But this is what we're doing. This is what we're doing. There are many, many, many people out there that, we were just in Olympia, Washington, and I'd hear a story like this from somebody and be like, actually, anybody within the TLC would hear this story and they wouldn't even bother telling it unless they were in a Randos conversation with me, and I pulled it out of them because they're like, my story is just like everybody else's story. And because the story he just told, the story Heather just told, it's like, you're not alone. Now, maybe you look around in the country and you look at the screens and you look at and you imagine this country that you project out there, all calibrated by all these images of the screens. You think you're pretty weird in this space, but no, you're not. Well, maybe you are weird, but not because of this.
And you know what? Thank God that going to mass actually feels nostalgic. So I actually like it, and it's a meditation. And you know what? I don't even. I don't see any conflict between science and faith at all. These are two different lenses on two different planes. You know, I went to 12 years.
Yeah, we could talk about that.
It was a Catholic school. Evolution was taught. There was nothing unscientific about it. And then the other piece of the puzzle too is I think one of the things that impacted me so much about 10/7 and so much about I have a deep connection to Judaism by way of my Catholicism and my relationships and my friendships. And I see this unbroken brotherhood that is, I think, the bedrock of why
He must work in Hollywood.
we're here still. And I want to be a part of that. And why not be a part of it? I think I'm only here once. So I'm going to just go with the thing that seems like it, you know.
How Catholic were you? Well, here, New Heavens, New Earth.
Makes sense. And, you know, if I'm going to be Christian, why not be the OG? Like, none of those are, you asked, so I'm taking the liberty here to lay it out. But is that persuasive to people? I don't know. I watched this video about, you've mentioned fractals.
I don't know how persuasive it is, but you're certainly not alone. And part of the thing, I always worry when I do commentary on a channel that I don't actually have any relationship with, because, I mean, they could copyright strike me, I suppose, but YouTube now in the back end does give you a little thing, and somewhere, if he ever checks, I don't know, I never check, because if you want to use my stuff, use my stuff. But there's a little channel, it's like, you know, other channels that have used your content, and if he goes through it, it'd be like, who's this? Who's that? Look at that plaid shirt. Did you get that at Costco? Probably.
Several times. And there's this great video, and it's got a provocative YouTube clickbait title, like the math that no atheist wants you to see. And it's just the Mandelbrot set. And it's a mathematician who's also a Christian zooming into the Mandelbrot set. And so the Mandelbrot set, for people who don't know it, you should Google it, is basically like this visualization of a very simple equation that plots dots on a graph. And when you run it through a computer, it gives you infinite emergent complexity that is also beautiful, none of which makes any damn sense. It doesn't make sense why a simple equation would give rise to infinite complexity that doesn't repeat. You zoom in and it looks the same, but it's slightly different. You zoom in on this little tendril and now it looks really different. And, oh, what's this part over here that looks like an ocean? And, oh, these spirals look like about 1,000 other things I see in nature. And so that's like all in my head. And then there's this other piece of the moral puzzle, and then I'll stop talking, because as an interviewer, this is like, I shouldn't be doing this much, but you asked. And I think this might be a good place to end our conversation. And I'll just give you my take, and then I'll ask you for yours. I don't see an argument that sticks for the equal dignity of every human being, absent creation and a soul. Because we're not all equal. Some are smart, some are dumb, some are ugly, some are weak, some are tall, some are short, some are malevolent, some are altruistic. But like, one thing we're not is equal. Like, we're not equal. Equality is an abstraction and an invention. It's not a product of reality. And yet I think equality of dignity, equality of our humanness, that means I shouldn't kill you in the service of something, because that's just plain wrong because of our equal dignity. I have tried to find a suitable non-religious justification for that, and I don't see it. And utilitarianism doesn't stack up because you can't measure utility. So it's like, we've got an equation for what is good. How do you measure it? Well, we can't. So, okay, well, great, but that sounds like nonsense. So that's my long-winded answer to your question. I mean, you can
And go to the original video, where you will not find me interrupting at all, and find their answer to it. So we'll leave that big teaser, because Heather's about to jump in first. But before we go, back to this. You know the meme where the dude is sweating because he doesn't, know which button to press? I just pictured Sam there. It's like, talk about the TLC or talk about the Trinity. And it's just back and forth over this as this video went to its end.
So another aspect of this kind of pluralistic, post-liberal, internet-fueled, Christian diverse era is that some doctrinal topics that might have seemed settled long ago are up for discussion again if the boundaries are no longer able to be enforced in the same way.
What would Sam be talking about?
And I feel that especially poignantly and personally myself, I grew up in a non-Trinitarian Christian tradition and then kind of get thrown out here in the world, and that elicits all sorts of different reactions. And, some people are like, well, come on, the doctrine of the Trinity, we settled that at Nicaea or Constantinople long ago. Why are you bringing that up again? It's like, well, why not? And so it seems like we're back into the landscape of who can compete for the most compelling explanation. How do we deal with this sort of new level of complexity and openness on topics, even some that, might feel like they were settled a long time ago?
Well, so I think that's a very good question, and I recognize exactly what you're talking about.
Sam only asked very good questions this whole time, which is Sam.
Let me go back to C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis says, look, one of the problems we have is we're taking part in a conversation that's been going on for a very long time, and very often we don't know what the earlier stage in that conversation is. And that's a helpful comment. And when you're thinking about, for example, Christology or the doctrine of the Trinity, actually, if you go back to the earlier conversations, you can see why people got to the positions that they did. And actually, what I'm worried about, I think, is that very often today we're almost beginning these conversations from ground zero, as if the history wasn't there. I think it's really helpful to try and go back to, for example, early Christianity and just say, look, let's see how these guys reasoned, how these guys got to those conclusions, how they understood them, and why they thought they made sense. And one of the things I found in a lifetime of teaching theology is that actually it really does help people to understand why people settled on these ideas rather than other ones, because it does, if you like, begin to answer some of the questions you're asking. Not necessarily, how do we articulate this today, but rather, why did some people think this was really important? So I think understanding how you got to these ideas is very, very helpful. And that leaves open the question of how best do we explain these ideas today? How do we connect them with our culture? So what I'm saying is that if you take the time to get to know something about Christian theology, you will understand certainly how these ideas emerged and why they were found so persuasive, and why I think personally they're still really helpful. But then there's a second point, and the second point is, how do we discuss these today? How do we apply these to our own situation? And there, I think we're on our own a bit, because we're trying to articulate theology in a context that earlier Christian writers simply could not have foreseen. And therefore, we are trying to do our best in this new context to try and work out how best to articulate and explore these ideas in our modern world.
And so, of course, that's what we're doing. That's what we're doing in these live streams. That's what we're doing in Estuary. That's what we're doing. And he basically makes a very similar point to what Bret made, that we need to talk about these things. And how do we talk about these things? And fortunately, we do have YouTube, which is longer form, and cue every conversation that I've had over the last 7 years about Estuary and, okay, TLC. I've used TLC a number of times, and some people are, well, what is that? Well, that's this flotilla of channels that we are having these conversations. And I think I have to leave it there because I have to go. So please leave a comment. And yeah, super, super interesting. Leave a comment.